whole idea of when I was invited to this, which I'm extremely grateful for. This is my second time here. I always use these platforms as an opportunity to first share what is the thinking within the government and what is it influenced by. But there is no one thinking in the government. To every thought that research and people like me will put up, there are alternate thoughts which will come from the political side, it will come from social side. So there are many aspects to inputs that go into policy making. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we have come. Because sometimes, and I'll talk also about the narrative, and I'll give you some data to show that narratives are very important. We cannot wish them away. We cannot say, oh, but we are growing at 8%, 10%. Why isn't everybody happy? Why is there so much opposition? And I think a large part of it is because we don't always know what the objective truth is. And in a country like India, 1.4 billion, there are many lived realities, which means it's not like everyone is better off the same way. So we are going to look at distributions also of everything. Okay, next. Okay, this graph, these are graphs by New York-based NGO based on global data. You know why these are important? This is called the poverty clock. They measure how many people are coming out of poverty every day, in fact every minute. And you can see this is in the midst of the pandemic. You see India is green, which means India is on its way to attaining its first sustainable development goal, which is eradication of poverty. And you see it is green. Of course, we hate this graph because the way they write, they draw the graph, which means we are also working on the shape 5. Why they should use the updated and proper maps. But you see, there are many ongoing exercises that happen simultaneously. The thing to learn here is, in the midst of the pandemic, despite such a major blow to global economy, an economy like India remains green, meaning on its path to attaining elimination of extreme poverty in the midst of a global turmoil. The lesson here is we actually outperform much richer countries. If you look at South Africa, which is 3 times richer than us, if you look at Brazil, which is 2.5 times richer than us. So it's not about how much resource you have, but very importantly, how are you using that resource to overcome a problem as difficult as eradication of poverty. Right? So it's important to recognize that we stayed on the path. Next. This is the latest data. Now we are in the grey zone. What does grey zone mean? Absolute poverty now is less than 3%. Much like the rest of the developed world. Which is why this is such a momentous occasion we are living through, and we must appreciate that in modern India, this is the first time we have actually brought poverty below 3%. We have been talking about poverty elimination now for decades, right? And we have actually managed to do it. There should be a lot more song and dance about an achievement such as this than the way we usually, now it's like, oh, it's expected. We are discounting these major achievements that is happening despite the pandemic. Next. This is now SDG 3. It has to do with maternal mortality rate. So now I'm showing you data from the ground in terms of poverty. This is maternal mortality rate. The number of mothers that die for every 1,000 live births. You see the orange bars are the rate at which the world is reducing MMR. The blue bar is the rate at which India is reducing maternal mortality. We are reducing twice as fast as everybody else. It's a miracle that is happening. And a lot of it is fundamentally based on the fact that we have resources today. We are growing at the rate that we are growing, but not just growth. There are many more affluent countries I just showed you. Today, if you go to South Africa, they are puzzled when they see us, and we are puzzled when we see them. How can such a rich economy, twice, almost 3 times richer, be so unequal? There is no talk of basic amenities. There is no talk of really changing the lives of a certain large segment of the society. So India is an exception. It's important to realize that of course we are fast growing, and that is the nice side of the story. What is less understood is what are we doing on the development front. Just look at the rate at which we are doing it. Next. This is infant mortality rate, and on the x-axis you have economic growth, meaning per capita income. Every state of India, whether you look at southern states, western states, poorer states, everybody is reducing infant mortality rate at an unprecedented rate, given economic growth. Your rich states, most everybody is reducing infant mortality. It is also an SDG, something we are signatory to and we are actually achieving it. Next. Now, India is very intolerant, India is becoming violent. Yes, these are anecdotal evidence. For everybody who says India is becoming violent, people will say, no, but that is not my reality. So, anecdotes are very difficult to deal with scientifically, right? Because for every anecdote, there is an opposite anecdote. Data therefore becomes relatively more objective. These are the number of riots that have happened in India in the last 50 years. And it goes beyond 50 years. Why do I study something like riot? Because the definition is it's well-defined variable and the definition has not changed over time. It is a violent episode involving 5 or more people for a common purpose. And it is registered in the police station. Now, when you look at what is happening to rioting in India, what do you see? India used to have more than 100,000 riots a year. Today, that number is below 40,000. We are more peaceful today if measured objectively in terms of rioting, because it's an event that's unfolding on the streets, it's not at the borders. We are more peaceful today than we have been in the last 50 years. And when is the structural breakdown? Meaning, when does the trend break? The trend breaks in 90s. There is opportunity cost of violence. Is it because policing has become more effective or we are spending more on police? No. There has not been that kind of an impact and change in policing. People have less tolerance for that much street violence now, which is often forgotten because we are all hyper-connected on the telephone, on mobile phones. One riot is one too many. We all know about what happened in the riots in the recent few years because we are all connected. What we lose is a sense of objectivity that we used to have a lot when we speak to our parents. They'll tell you, there's so much rioting. Now it is a lot more peaceful. Next. This is crime against women, in particular rapes. Why do we study rape? Again, for the same reason, the definition has not changed. If you look at all the states of the Union, and the first graph on top is all India, you are seeing a structural break, meaning in the trend around 16, 17, 18, you are seeing a decline. Is this BJP? No, because if you see across different states, you are seeing whether the dispensation is Congress, BJP, JDU, whatever your political preference might be, you are seeing state after state after state. In fact, the only anomaly to this overall national trend is if you look at Rajasthan, Jharkhand, Haryana. And this is a long-term trend. Meaning those are places where we have not got the trend. Okay? We have to work harder in these places. But overall crime against women is declining very rapidly. Now, why did it happen around 16, 17, 18? Because you have something called, and this is based on a Lancet study, it's access to toilets was a major driver. A lot of crimes were associated with women going out for defecation. So toilets, Swachh Bharat, when we were promoting and talking about why toilets should be built, mostly we made health arguments, right? The motivation was infant mortality is high, fecal matter finds its way into the house through water, food, etc. So you need to make society open defecation free. But the most important unintended consequence of that is women's lives. You've had a reduction of 22% in the form of assaults on them, 14% reduction in rapes. These are very, very big changes. And these are changes which we aren't as familiar with. We aren't talking about it. But this is what quality of life is about. Toilet is a highly gendered problem. Next. Now electricity, and while we were talking yesterday, if you were here, electrification is again one of those basic amenities which we want to provide everywhere. So electrification means now you're on the grid, you will get electricity. The politics come into the form of how much free electricity. But leaving that aside, if you just look at what has happened to access to electricity, all India, the poorest 20%, only half of them had electricity until 14-15. Today that number is in 90s. Now, there is a government side of the story. The administration will tell you 100% electrification because that is administrative data. If it goes into the basti, they are electrified. But survey data becomes more powerful because the households are self-reporting whether they have it or not. And even there you are close to 90-95%. So there is real change happening. to the poorest segment of your society. Is it happening only for Hindus? Is it happening only for higher caste, lower caste? No. Everybody, in fact, the rise is a little bit higher for Muslim households. If you look at the survey data, these are 12 lakh self-reported survey data points. That is why I say it's objectively factual. It's not based on anecdote, or it's not even based on a government view. If you look at all different social classes, SCs, STs, religious groups, Hindus, Muslims, you can break the data the way you want. Everybody, and these are the poorest 20% in each of these categories, everybody has almost universal election. Next. This is the beautiful graph from a publication out of the IFRI team that just got out in Nature that Anand also talked about yesterday. This is, the top is how infant mortality has been declining, and the bottom is how access to any toilet has improved. Are you seeing that after 15-16, the last two graphs, they are highly correlated. Right? The building of the toilets has led to saving of 60,000 babies a year. That's the kind of talks we. Yes, next. Now, what is happening in terms of actual spending of households? Everybody, in fact, the biggest increase you have had in the last 10 years in terms of spending per capita monthly expenditure, the biggest rise is of scheduled caste, 178%. Okay. Everybody is seeing very significant increase. So, in some sense, we can say this is what inclusive growth is about. The top ballpark number of 8 to 10%, which attracts most media, that is just a very superficial understanding of what is happening in the economy. These are the real changes that we have to highlight, that it is inclusive growth. Next. I'm sorry this graph is, it's a beautiful graph, I really like it. You can't see it very well, but this is rural and that's urban, so rural and urban. This is telling you across all the states of the country, the bottom 20%, what is the ownership of vehicles? Bottom 20%. Ownership of vehicles, it used to be 6% 10 years back. Today it is 40%. Are you seeing the rise? And rural and urban. In fact, what you have to now worry about from a policy side, what now we have to think of, if 40% of your poorest rural households have bikes or scooters or three-wheelers or whatever, we have to now start thinking of amenities for those guys. You have to have maybe traffic police in villages. Of course, your villages are no longer villages, what you thought of, but you are urbanizing very fast. People's lives are changing very fast. We have to now think of amenities and civic amenities, urban amenities in a pace that is real economy of India's state. Next. If you look at the poorest, just think of consuming fresh fruits. It's like a luxury. That's the general sense you have fresh fruits. This is the poorest 10% households. Just look at the increase. You had only 31% who had any form of fresh fruits 10 years back. Today, it's about 70. In fact, Chhattisgarh, 1% were consuming some form of milk. That number is now up to like 55 or whatever. Are you seeing the magnitude of the change? It's enormous. It's just that we're not putting it down in the form of real changes and talking about it so that people get to know. Next.